Have you ever been on a shoot that starts to completely fall apart or spiral out of control? Or have you dove into an edit and realized that you're swimming in hours and hours of footage and are completely lost and overwhelmed by it all? Or do you finally finish a film, but months pass and you don't feel any sense of accomplishment and it hasn't changed the trajectory of your career at all? Well, welcome to the wondrous world of pre-production, or rather, what happens when you don't do it. So in this video, I want to share with you my 7 best tips for pre-production, which are the lessons that have saved me from enormous shoot chaos, edit confusion, and the crushing existential dread of working in the film industry. Okay, that last one isn't completely true, but it definitely helps take the edge off. This is an odd one to start with and not something I think many people really talk about, but through making this mistake many, many times, I think it's crucial to very clearly define why you are making this film, both creatively and professionally. So creatively, what would success look like for you? Is it to try something new with your craft or skills, explore a theme you care about or are interested in, shine a light on a hidden topical person? Do you want to inspire people or challenge them? Or is this purely for your own self-improvement? And then professionally, what's the outcome? Is it a calling card for your reel? Or is it something where the most eyeballs on it as possible is the goal? Do you want it to go on to the festival circuit and hopefully have one of those posters with hundreds of laurels on? Or is it simply a commissioned brand or client projects and the only professional goal is that the client is happy at the end of the day? Those answers will quietly shape every single decision you make, from the length of the shoot to the overall tone to how much you're willing to spend on it. And when you're deep in the edit swamp asking, is this any good at all? You can ask the calmer question, is this doing the job I set out for? And it turns the kind of taste question into just a simple checklist of, does this cut serve the creative goal and or the professional one? And if not, you just change the cut, not the goal. And the final thing that doing this goal-orientated process does is it gives you a way of self-reflecting at the end of a project. Because the truth is, filmmaking is wildly subjective, which means you can swing between being brutally overcritical and delusionally proud, sometimes within the same 5 minutes. And because we're often working in isolation or just moving from one job to the next, it's very easy to lose perspective and to end up stuck in a loop where everything starts to just blur together. But having a clearly defined goal gives you a kind of anchor point and a structure for evaluating what actually worked and what didn't. And it lets you step back and see the wood from the trees a little better, and to measure progress on your own terms rather than through like algorithms, client emails, or the number of festival selections you get. And that's how you build real creative growth, in my opinion, through these small continuous improvements and having a genuine pride in your internal achievements, not external validation. And once you know why you're doing it, you can start to figure out what you can afford in time, money, and energy. So every film costs something, even passion projects. There's travel, there's food, there's hard drives and backup drives, there's insurance, there's festival submissions, whatever. When I made my short documentary, A Strong Woman, which followed 3 of the strongest women in the world, we were working with a very small pre-dictated budget to get that project done. And writing out every single cost in a budget made me realize how far I could realistically follow each story thread, which athletes I could visit and how many days I could spend with each of them, and how I could afford to cover the major competition itself. So it forced kind of creative discipline, and even a rough Google sheet can save you from overstretching, or worse, getting halfway through a film and realize you can't finish it, or getting sucked down a rabbit hole of continuously needing to spend more and more money. Now, I've touched on this next point a little bit before in my video about how I use my psychology degree to get the best interview from contributors, but just from a purely logistical and practical viewpoint, I can't emphasize enough how important doing pre-interviews are. So pre-interviews are just essentially very informal conversations with the contributor or contributors. You don't want to get too deep emotionally into anything, as you want to save that for the main interview itself, but you're instead instead trying to do three very important things. The first is build trust and set the tone for how you will work together and start to form a relationship and a language with them that will make the whole process more authentic and much, much smoother. The second is story discovery. So you're trying to find the kind of main emotional core and narrative beats of the film so that you can go away after that and sketch out a more rigorous narrative spine. And that will really allow you to hone in on the questions you want to ask during the real interview itself and which ones you want to dive deeper into, what B-roll scenes you want to shoot that will pair with specific moments in your narrative, and that will save you hours and hours of time in the edit where you're trying to reverse engineer this process where the building blocks might not be there in the first place. And lastly, doing a pre-interview lets you talk about logistics and explore more of what the contributor's day-to-day life looks like or what the run-up to a certain event will be, all of which will help you plan the B-roll scenes you're going to go and try and capture. So during pre-interviews, I'll essentially ask the contributor to list every single thing they do, like daily routines, odd habits, rare events. I kind of want an oversized menu of everything. So school runs, training, commuting, making tea, taking the dog for a walk, everything. Even the kind of things that people might think are boring, like if you're brushing your teeth, can carry meaning if you shoot them in a certain way and place them at the right moment in the edit. And then what I do is I pair those scenes to beats in the narrative spine. So for example, a morning routine might represent somewhere where they're talking about solitude or repetition, or working out in the gym could represent dedication or commitment. And I tend not to shot list or storyboard anything specifically within those scenes, as there's normally too many variables or unknowns to get that specific into things. But I might have a list of kind of key shots or actions for certain scenes just to help me stay on track for ideas on the day. But going in with that intention means I shoot with purpose and not just reactively. If you can, I always try to recce in person. If you can't, I'll ask the contributor to send a video walkthrough and as thoroughly as possible. So doors, windows, noise sources, practicals you can turn off and on, how cramped the hallways are, where the sun position might be, if there's a dog that often barks in one of the neighbours' gardens. A quick recce like that avoids 80 to 90% of issues and faff that you end up in on the day, and you can preempt things like space problems or lighting issues. You can also plan things like where and when you want to do the interview based on potential noise or sun position. You can choose the time of day you want for certain scenes or how you might want to light certain spaces. And then it can also open up some creative ideas like scene details or shots you might get, or even whole additional B-roll sequence ideas that you didn't come up with in the pre-interview. And once you've seen the space, whether in person or virtually, you can start to think about how you shoot it. And by that, I mean not just where you put the camera, but what language the film speaks in. So if you've seen my video on what makes documentaries cinematic, you'll know I think the key in terms of cinematography is to be subjective, intentional, and consistent. Because most docs aren't ruined by bad shots. I think they're ruined by incoherence. So by being subjective, I mean you're not just pointing the camera at something interesting or finding pretty shots, you're showing how it feels to be inside someone's world or head. Then intentional means you've made your creative choices not just on what looks nice, but linking it back to the theme and the story you're telling. And consistent just means you commit to it. So once you've decided on a visual language, you stick to it so that the film feels like a single world, not 5 different DPs arguing on one timeline. And I'll usually start this process by putting together a mood board of images, photography, art, and other film references, all as just sort of a jumping off point to explore what starts to feel right and have a bit of a compass for where the cinematography should be heading. And then from this, I'll narrow down a set of rules or limitations that we stick to throughout a project. However, all of this means absolutely nothing if you don't work with the person in front of the camera, not just pointed at them. So this last point is the biggest single lesson I've learned working in documentaries, and that is that your contributor isn't just a subject. They're essentially your unofficial co-producer and even at times co-director, because they end up helping with logistics, scheduling, access, and sometimes and very often they're the reason you're even allowed in certain rooms or places. But they can also end up setting a lot of the tone for the film, because if they feel like they're part of the process, I think the footage starts to feel more alive. Whereas if they feel observed or managed, it starts to look a bit stiff, no matter how beautiful it is. So remember to try and be really open with them and explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what might end up on camera. Agree certain boundaries together, keep them looped in if plans change, and don't underestimate how much you're actually asking of them, because even when people say they're fine being filmed, it's still very, very weird having someone follow you every moment with a camera. And if you get this part right, everything else, the shots, the story, the edit, comes so much easier, because that sort of collaboration is not about just good ethics. I think it's really the shortcut to authenticity. So that's really what good pre-production comes down to, removing as much chaos as possible before you even hit record. And it's not about trying to control reality, because most of the time documentaries you can't. You just need to get your goals clear, understand your limits, build trust, and give yourself the space to react when real situations inevitably get in the way of your plans. And if you want to see how all of this plays out once the cameras do start to roll, you should go watch my video on how I use psychology to get better interviews from contributors, which goes a little bit more in depth on some of the points we've covered in this video, but more specifically focuses on that last point around the relationship you build with contributors.